how and why. Thanks, Sonia. Sorry. We're going to be talking about how and why Palestinian advocacy specifically is censored and why advocates for Palestine get repressed and how they get repressed, and just some tools and resources to help people who might be in that situation, or if you're worried about being in that situation and that's maybe why you don't engage in as much advocacy. Hopefully this kind of helps give you the tools to feel protected and to feel confident and strong enough to engage in advocacy for Palestine. Before she's gonna come in at 8, so again, just a reminder of our little caterpillar to freedom. We are on the repression portion today. Next week, we also have a very exciting guest speaker or conversation about allyship, privilege, and solidarity. And this is going to be led by someone who's part of a group called Jews for Right of Return. So a very, I don't want to use the word radical because I don't like that, using that word often, but a very strong and very appreciated solidarity group and practice solidarity in a way that feels very comfortable as someone who does Palestine advocacy. So also very excited for those. So we're going to have some great guest speakers from now until the rest of the course. So today, I wanted to do a quick round of check-ins, see how everyone is doing. Mid-course housekeeping, so that was the survey. If anyone is coming on, it's hard to see who comes on with sharing screen, but I will keep putting it in the chat for whoever jumps on next. We're going to start off with a discussion question just with ourselves before the guest speaker comes, and then we're going to welcome her. Her name is Amal. I'll officially introduce her when she's on. She's going to take us through some of Palestine Legal's work and tools. So to get us started, I think I want us to answer that. Well, first, check-ins. Does anyone want to check in about anything specifically, anything that's been going on globally or nationally or personally? We have some time where we have some relaxed 20 minutes before she comes on to kind of just check in if needed. And there's no pressure to, I'm just going to give us a minute or two to think about it. If not, if at any point anyone wants to, please let us know, or if you want to discuss some of what we asked in the survey, that's all anonymous, but my voice, but if you want to discuss it or let myself or Donya know if there's anything we can improve, please let us know. And we take the surveys very seriously, so we'll be going over those also. Yeah, I did hear actually that there was a small earthquake in Palestine today. I think it was 4 point something. Yeah, it's been a lot seeing all the, it's like every week something happens, something very tragic happens. So I think I've been like trying to avoid stuff, but you can't avoid it. And yeah, I think most recently I've seen, and I have to look into this a little bit more, and I don't like to compare struggles, but I saw some conversation about like Turkey is getting a lot of news attention and support, but Syria isn't getting as much. And so like thinking about that geopolitical reality, and a lot of the people that are going to be like double and triple and maybe even 4th time displaced because of the earthquake, if they're Palestinians or Syrians, or if they're Syrians that's relocated to other parts of Syria and now might have to relocate again. So it's very difficult. There's one organization that I know is doing good work and is trusted to donate to, and we can share that. And if anyone else has resources or people that they trust doing some work that we can support or donate to, please let us know and just share it in the WhatsApp group. Yeah, I know. Yeah. Brian put in the chat, in case you didn't see it, a US ally who denies their genocide gets more support, unfortunately. Anything else that anyone wants to share? So I guess not a perfect segue, but what I want us to talk about internally before Amal comes is this question that I'm going to put in the chat. I want us to take 5 minutes of just personally, if 5 minutes is too much, you could just let us know when you're ready to share out in large group, but just at least 5-minute personal reflection of thinking of a moment or event or whatever instance where you felt repressed for whatever identity you hold. It was an uncomfortable moment, someone said something, or you said something that was shut down, or someone made an assumption about you. It doesn't have to be related to Palestine. It does not have to be something specifically political, although I think if you're repressed because of your identity, that becomes political, but we can talk about that. But just any moment that you can remember where you felt repressed or shut down, or a part of identity that you show or shared or hold was attacked. I'm just taking some time to think about it. You can write it down. You can just, have it in your head. And then at 7:40, between 7:45 and 7:47, depending how much time people need, we'll share out if you guys are. So I'll give 2 more minutes. I want to give some time, and I like doing this in a personal reflection because something we've been talking about, and Nani has been bringing up with PAC and just in general. I think a lot of times when things happen to people of marginalized identities, we just like brush it aside and we're used to normalizing it, and we want ourselves to start really like normalizing that it's not okay for us to feel that way and for things to happen to us. So that's why like, taking some time to really flesh this out and think it through. And thanks, Wasaif. Brian, your birthday is on Thursday, so we want to wish you a happy early birthday too. So if anyone is ready and wants to start us off and is comfortable sharing, feel free to start doing so. You can share as much of this as you want. If parts of it are too personal, that's okay. If we can get, I think, 1 or 2, that'll help the conversation with Emma when she comes in. Yeah, Jason, go ahead.
Yeah, I was thinking about when I was in college, I took a class called anthropology, and this class was unique because the school that I went to was a historically Black college, so a lot of majority people there were Black, but this particular professor was white, and it's an anthropology class, and so I noticed that a lot of the times the way she talked about African indigenous cultures was as if they were like primitive or kind of animalistic, and whereas the European colonizers, settlers were more so advanced and aware of education and knowledge, when et cetera and so forth. And so whenever I wrote essay responses, I kind of like took it as an opportunity to resist that narrative. And I stopped capitalizing the United States at one point just as like a way of pushing back against the narrative of the United States, and kind of naming it as a settler colony that isn't necessarily valid to indigenous people, um, and that how that can be a righteous form of protest. And basically, I ended up getting like a D or an F on all of my assignments for that. And then I ended up having to retake the class another semester. So it set me back academically. And I felt like I was being targeted just because of a political opinion, even though everything else was on point.
Thanks for sharing that, Jason. That's very frustrating. Very annoying. I'm sorry that happened, but that's very real. I used to think anthropology was like so cool and that's what I wanted to do. And then like the more you get into anthro, the more you realize it's just like it's like accepted present day colonial, I mean, somewhat colonialism actually, and like white saviorism. So a lot of, yeah, that does not surprise me, but it's still very frustrating. Um, thanks for starting this off. Anyone else want to share? Funny is going to start picking on people. And when you get close to the screen like that, that's, I've learned.
I think if everyone wants to share like something that they're comfortable with, and also if you haven't been through one, that's also like okay to say too. Brian?
Yeah, I'm glad the word was repressed and not oppressed. It would be tough. I mean, there is a lot of square peg round hole things I have with sort of some invisible disabilities between the ears that it's just difficult to move through the world. But certainly, with the identities that I carry, oppression is not necessarily something I experience often, but repression, anytime I try to, fight back at my where I work against what I find to be harmful policies and practices in education, I'm always getting pushback and sometimes ostracized, disciplined. In particular, real quick, I think Abir knows about this. I'm not sure about anybody else, but a student interviewed me for the Montclair High School newspaper about I think one of the questions was like activities you do outside of work that like inspire you and blah, 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 something like that. So, so I answered about my involvement in Palestine solidarity work, specifically mentioned the phrase BDS, and some parents in the community got the article taken down on the website, and BDS was called a terrorist hate group stuff, and I was accused of being anti-Semitic, et cetera, et cetera. And I had to really gather a lot of allies to like flood the school with emails, and also tell them that they were breaking a school journalism law, to get the article back up on the website. Now, I feel the students were more repressed than I was, because it was a student who wrote the article. But if I'm going through that, just trying to leverage you know, the privilege I have. I can only begin to imagine what some other folks have experienced.
Yeah, thanks, Brian, for sharing that. I think that's like, I mean, we're seeing that heighten now with IRA definitions, and it's a fear mongering tactic. It's a very like, unfortunately, classic fear mongering where if you say this, we're gonna call you this, and I think that story also shows like the power, and Jason's too, but like there is power to like intentionally set someone back or change something or take away an article that was important to the students and to you. And like, I think what always stands out to me in these moments, especially when it comes to Palestine and education, or actually on education in general, like there's always, someone always has so much power, just pick up a phone and call someone very high up and it gets heard, and people have to adhere to whatever the higher up says. And that goes back to like, we don't do the same. Like our parents, for example, from my experience at least, would not call the chancellor of the university or whatever it is and be like, you're repressing my daughter's rights for her activism. My parents would just tell me to stop and to be safe, and we don't have time for this, or we don't have enough means to potentially sacrifice for this. Not that they don't care, but that there's always that fear of like what's going to happen to your future. That I think that comes with power and privilege, and not everyone has to deal with that the same way. Anyone else want to share maybe one or two more? Zelda, is that your hand up or are you just reacting?
Yeah, my hand's up.
Okay, go ahead.
So, about 2 weeks ago, I had an assignment where I had to give examples about human right violations in the past and the present. And my first example was Palestine. And I mentioned the word Zionist. And yesterday, my teacher pulled me aside and he told me that he wanted to give me advice about maybe not using the word Zionist because it could offend people. So I told him that I actually use Zionist because I don't want to say Jewish, so I could be more specific, you know. So I found that interesting.
Go ahead,
I was gonna say, what happened afterwards? Like, did he just drop it?
But no, I told him that I use the word Zionist because I don't want to say, you know, Jewish, and that because I knew that using Jewish would be offensive to some people. And then he's like, oh, okay, I understand. But I feel like he didn't know what the word Zionist meant, because if he did, he wouldn't have thought that. But after that, he dropped it. Like, he didn't say anything after.
Unfortunate. I'm sorry you had to go through that.
Yeah,
Thank you.
and that, I don't know, I would just expect that he would also know. I don't know, maybe that's not fair.
I think a lot of people are just dumb.
Yeah, or it's the fear mongering and the, I don't know, that's very interesting. Thanks, Zelda, for sharing. I'm processing it. Sonia, do you want to add?
No, I think so. When I was in college, I had a history professor split the class up in two for a debate. One side had to be for slavery and the other had to be against. It made me and the other students very uncomfortable and no one wanted to participate.
I hate that. That is the one, like
Brian shaking his head. I agree, Brian.
Brian, as a teacher, I don't understand why we still stick to, like, I think there are other ways. I actually had, there are other ways to, I'm in higher education, and we had this conversation, and some people still believe that this is a great way to like teach people like how to debate and other sides and stuff. Hi, Ahmad. Well, thanks for joining. I'm about to formally introduce you, but yeah, they do that so much, and I hate the whole debate and dialogue discourses for certain. Yeah. Okay. Anyone else want to share before we move into introducing Ahmad and all the great things Paralegal has to offer?
I can share a quick story just before we get into Paralegal and all the great work they do have to offer. So I think two moments come to mind among many. And then when I think of repression, I think a lot of, like, obviously me when I'm in Palestine, there's a lot of repression that's happening towards me. But if I'm thinking about specifically in America, I remember both in college, like once my freshman year in college, I originally was studying journalism. And it was like I don't know, like a 200-person class. And we were talking about sensationalism. And then the topic of 9/11 came up. And I was the only visibly Muslim person in the class. And the professor, like, literally was like, okay, and so what do you think? And like was asking my opinion to talk about 9/11. I was so uncomfortable. I remember very like vividly feeling like uncomfortable and having to speak up because I was like, there's no one else that's Muslim here, and everyone around me was kind of like looking to answer. So that was one of the instances. Another one is just my entire journalism career at university. I think that so I was doing my journalism degree, and very early on, I had a really great professor who was encouraging me to kind of like find my voice in journalism. And I was covering a lot of stories about Palestine. And I found that as I progressed into my next year, I feel like I got somehow like redlined or something. And basically the professors became a lot harsher with me, were grading me a lot harsher. I even actually I was almost done with all my requirements to finish the journalism major when my advisor surprised and said, oh, there's this like requirement that you completely missed and that you have to do. So I ended up speaking to a couple of people that were in the department before, and they were saying that they are a very heavily Zionist department. And she was telling me like from the beginning, like before I even started, is just keep your ground and don't waver. And even the professor that I was working with, he also was saying like people are going to try to silence you, just keep your ground. And it was really hard. And then when I ended up switching majors because it got to the point where I wasn't going to graduate. So I was like, you know what, let me complete at least another major. And basically, when I talked to my other advisor, she was like kind of encouraging me to open a case and make sure I keep everything written, because she thought there was definitely something that was like, you know, it was racially inspired. Unfortunately, I was young and dumb and I didn't do anything about it, but live and you learn. And that's what Palestine Legal is here for, to teach us not to be quiet about this stuff.
It's a perfect segue. Thanks, Sonia, for sharing that. I feel like there's a theme of academia from what a lot of us shared. When you were sharing, I was thinking I had a professor tell me like to pick and choose when to be a scholar and when to be an activist, and that I shouldn't bring Palestine into my scholarly work. And I was like, just because you said that, I am doing it even more. But I think so. I'm just what we've started off with this question of like sharing a moment we felt repressed, and really, I think something we've been thinking about is how do we encourage, whether it's ourselves or community members, to like document these moments and to not normalize them and just, you know, shrug them as like that's just something that comes with our identity, but make some noise about it. So with that, I am very excited to be introducing Amel Thabate, who, like I said, works at with Palestine Legal and is the Michael Ratner Justice Fellow at Palestine Legal, where she challenges the censorship, surveillance, and suppression of advocates for Palestinian liberation. Amel has devoted her legal career to advancing the rights of communities facing security state abuse. Amel is a proud Palestinian and an incorrigible Brooklynite. She earned her JD from CUNY School of Law, where she was a Sorensen Center for International Peace and Justice Fellow, a Public Interest Merit Scholarship recipient, and served as Senior Staff Editor for CUNY Law Review. She is based in Palestine Legal's New York City office and is, the screen is cutting off that word, admitted to the New York State Bar. So I think the bio says it for itself. We're very excited and honored to have Amel be with us today. And Amel, the floor is yours. Let me know if you want me to keep sharing, and you could just tell me next slide, or if you want to share, I'm open to either.
Yeah, if you don't mind, I think it'll probably just be easiest if you keep sharing your screen, and I'll just indicate when to the next slide. But thank you so much, Aviad, and it's so good to see both you and Rania again. And thank you so much for inviting me to this class. I, just joined for like the later part of the discussion, but it sounds like you all had like really generative and amazing discussion. And I'm so happy that we started this way, because I think it'll sort of segue into my presentation pretty perfectly. It's always a little weird seeing my face on the screen, so we go to the next one. Perfect. So yeah, like Aviad mentioned, my name is Amel. I'm an attorney here in Brooklyn, New York. I'm the fellow at Pal Legal. And what I hope to sort of go through today, a couple of things. One, to give a quick introduction into Palestine Legal, if you're not already familiar with our organization, and like a quick intro into our work. And then I will speak about the background on the movement for Palestinian rights in the US. I'll also speak to repression tactics, which I'm sure won't be new to you all. It sounds like you all have your own experiences and stories with repression. And talk about the different ways to recognize and identify the ways in which repression can manifest itself. And then lastly, I'll end off with ways or examples of standing back and standing strong and ways to push back to these tactics of repression. So we are sorry, you can keep the same slide. Yes, perfect. We are a legal advocacy organization. And our mission is to bolster the grassroots movements for Palestinian rights. We do that in several different ways. We give legal advice. We provide Know Your Rights workshops, Know Your Rights trainings, advocacy, and litigation support. We do this for college students, grassroots activists, scholars, professors, and others who stand for justice in Palestine. We also document and track all the different tactics that are being used to silence advocates for Palestinian rights. And this includes a lot of different things, which I'll talk about today, but namely it includes repressive legislation. Next slide, please. So the movement for Palestinian rights is really growing. There's a growing Palestinian solidarity movement in the US. It's student-led, it's really diverse, it's dynamic, and we see a range of different actors engaging in different forms of advocacy, including BDS, which I'm also going to briefly talk about in this presentation. And this, these actors include like churches to campuses, academic boycotts, cultural boycotts, and the movement is increasingly categorized by cross-movement support. So we're seeing this movement interconnected with Indigenous, Black, and other racial justice struggles. And it's important to note also that these allies are often the ones that are targeted the most by censorship and harassment. And we also see this growing movement for Palestinian rights increasingly filtering up from the grassroots. So we see like athletes, artists, celebrities, and even more politicians willing to break from the status quo. Next slide. And so this growing movement for Palestinian rights here is in response to ongoing and systemic violations of Palestinian human rights, to the decade-long blockade and repeated destruction of Gaza, to the unending settlement growth, to continuing human rights abuses, growing apartheid-like conditions in Israel, and all of this with the full backing and financial support of the US. So decades-long impunity and lack of accountability really coalesced 15 years ago around a call from Palestinian civil society to boycott, divest, and sanction against Israel until it complied with its international law obligations. And you'll see sort of the demands that BDS kind of lists out at the bottom of this slide. And BDS is really modeled after anti-apartheid efforts to put international pressure on South Africa. So when I refer to BDS, this is what I'm referring to, a peaceful call for solidarity by Palestinian civil society. The call urges nonviolent pressure on Israel until it fully complies with international law. It opposes all forms of racism, including anti-Semitism. And then it demands an end to discrimination faced by Palestinian citizens of Israel, the right of Palestinian refugees to return to their homes, and an end to military occupation. Next, please. And so why does an organization like Palestine Legal need to exist? Well, that's because these calls for freedom, equality, justice for Palestinians, and criticism of Israel's treatment of Palestinians have equally been met with efforts to censor, to chill, sanction, to punish, the list goes on. And like I mentioned, we document these incidents of repression. We've documented nearly 2,000 since 2014. And we're also going to go into these like different tactics that we've noted and documented, and also on an individual level why it's so important to document. Next slide. And that's that's why we have come to call what we know to call the Palestine exception, because we see that advocates who speak out for Palestinian rights are routinely questioned, threatened, falsely accused, censored, or punished. And we see this playing out in so many different ways, from school administrators giving, greater scrutiny of or like restrictions on student events relating to Palestine, or we see it in schools going as far as banning student groups from organizing for Palestinian rights, groups like Students for Justice in Palestine, SJP. We see this by Palestinians and allies being doxxed or cyberbullied, and the livelihoods threatened for speech in support of Palestinian rights, and hundreds of other types of incidents. This just names a few. Next slide. And so over the years, we've seen various methods of intimidation used to bully those who speak in support of Palestine. So what do Palestine advocates face? First, they face false accusations. And this first tactic, I'm going to spend a lot of time on. And this is because false accusations lays the foundation for many other tactics. Smearing the movement, smearing advocates with accusations of either anti-Semitism or links to terrorism. And we're also seeing an increasing effort to codify false accusations into law or to give them legal force, including via legislation and executive action. But some others include cyberbullying and doxing, free speech violations, surveillance, discrimination or harassment, lawsuits and legal threats, and criminal investigations and prosecutions. Next slide. So like I mentioned, the first thing we're going to focus on are false accusations. And there are two types. There are false accusations of anti-Semitism and false accusations of links to or support for terrorism. Next slide. And so like I mentioned, false accusations has been the most common tactic that we've documented at Palestine Legal. And it really lays the foundation for many other forms of repression and harassment. We've noted that more than 60% of the incidents we responded to involve false accusations. And that's because by relying on anti-Palestinian, anti-Arab, anti-Muslim tropes, smear campaigns are falsely portraying activists who support Palestinian freedom as either violent and having links to terrorism or anti-Semitic. Next slide. So thinking a little bit first about false terrorism accusations. Since 2014, we responded to more than 600 incidents where advocates were falsely accused of supporting terrorism simply, merely because of their support for Palestinian rights. And this is because Israel and Israel advocacy groups and organizations seek to paint anyone who supports Palestinian rights as supporting violence or supporting terrorism. And they really rely on these anti-Muslim xenophobic stereotypes that Arab and Muslims are inherently violent. And the intention here is to make any support for Palestinian human rights, no matter where it's coming from or how it's portrayed, to be perceived as support for terrorism. And this can be really effective, and we see it actually being really effective because it really terrifies people and it scares themselves, and people scare themselves into self-censorship. Because we have sort of this paralyzing fear that if you speak out for Palestine, if you advocate for Palestine, then you might be smeared as a terrorist. And once people see the T word, they kind of stay completely away from everything you're saying or doing and kind of make all these judgments. And as you all know, I'm sure, in October 2021, Israel declared 6 prominent Palestinian human rights groups as terrorist institutions, subjecting them to harsh sanctions under Israeli law. And again, these designations were based on unfounded accusations and racist propaganda. Israel has long been targeting these organizations because they're doing critical work that exposes the constant violations of Palestinian rights. And so we see here in the US, accusations being weaponized via lawsuits, via legal threats, via smears against individuals and organizations. One example is the lawsuit against the US Campaign for Palestinian Rights, in which a national coalition that's dedicated to advancing Palestinian human rights here in the US was accused of supporting terrorism. Another example are all the Zoom events that we see being canceled. One of them featuring Leila Khalid that was shut down by social media companies because Zionist groups complained. Next slide. And so we spoke a little bit about false accusations of terrorism or links to terrorism. But now we're going to talk a little bit about false anti-Semitism accusations. And again, this is one of the primary tactics that anti-Palestinian groups have used to silence political debate by branding all support for Palestinian rights as anti-Jewish. And so since 2014, we've responded to over 1,000 incidents involving false accusations of anti-Semitism. That's roughly half of the incidents that we respond to each year. So this is probably one of the biggest ones that we're noting. And in an effort to really add legitimacy to this tactic, Israel advocacy groups have lobbied for legislation, have lobbied for policies that would codify these smears into law by basically redefining anti-Semitism to encompass all criticism of Israel. And these efforts have really come under several different names and iterations, but one of the most prevalent ones is the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance, or the IHRA definition. And this IHRA definition essentially is a distorted definition of anti-Semitism that says, really, any criticism of Israel is anti-Semitic. And it defines things such as applying a double standard to Israel as anti-Semitic, focusing peace or human rights investigations only on Israel as anti-Semitic, and that claiming that the existence of a state of Israel is a racist endeavor and is therefore anti-Semitic. And we've seen states such as Florida, South Carolina, Texas, and more with these laws that adopt some version of this definition. We've seen a lot of bills that are pending and then fail to pass in Congress. But this is all coming out of a 2019 executive order that Donald Trump signed, directing government agencies to consider this definition when investigating discrimination allegations. And unfortunately, this executive order is still in place under Biden. Next slide. And so the way these laws conflate criticism of Israel with anti-Semitism is really problematic and dangerous for several different reasons. First, what it does, most probably relevant to all of us in our work, is that it blurring the line between anti-Semitism and criticism of Israel will just result in censorship of constitutionally protected political speech, because criticism of Israel is constitutionally protected political speech. Secondly, though, it distracts the understanding and addressing of the actual danger of actual anti-Semitism happening from white supremacists. And then lastly, what it does is these definitions aim to chill and silence those who are willing to speak out for Palestinian rights. And we know this because it's been happening for years, even before the definition was written into law, that people are just really terrified, and they're willing to speak out for Palestinian rights, but they see things like these, like the IHRA definition being codified in different ways, and they sort of self-censor themselves because these definitions are chilling and they're silencing. And so I really wanted to spend some time laying the groundwork for false accusations as the first tactic, because it really is at the heart of so many of the other tactics that we're going to talk about that are used to silence advocates for Palestinian rights. Next slide. And so a second tactic that we see is cyberbullying and harassment and doxing. Next slide. Online blacklists and other doxing websites collect information, personal information about people, Palestinian rights advocates, and they create these profiles on these individuals and falsely accuse them of anti-Semitism and terrorism, leading to a cruel cyber harassment campaign against these advocates. And so these social media harassment campaigns often involve a lot of different things. Sometimes they involve these petitions to sign on and basically denounce or condemn this person for being anti-Semitic or supporting terrorism. sometimes what these profiles or campaigns will do is like tag law enforcement agencies in people's tweets about Palestine. So what we've seen a lot in the past is like employees getting fired or like receiving some kind of scrutiny from their employer because a online like blacklisting website or one of these organizations tagged their employer on a tweet that they had made about Palestine. We also see the involvement of act.il. It's a mobile phone app that's funded by the Israeli government, and it rewards users to send pre-drafted complaints with false information and accusations to their schools or to their employers. And so while schools or employers are facing a ton of pressure from these organizations to punish or to like question their advocates, the advocates on the other end are receiving a mass of threatening, violent, and really racist messages. And I just want to note, I think one of the ways in which we can really like drill in the importance of like documenting and keeping record of things is like when it comes to like online and like our lives online. Like so many times I've told clients, when they kind of experience these kind of smear campaigns, to really save like every message that they've ever received, like every violent or harassing message, tweet, retweet, Facebook post, because it's so crucial to document for so many reasons. And I'll be talking about that throughout the presentation, but I think it really relates the most with the like online world, because so much of this is already happening on our phones and text, and it's just really easy to like screenshot and keep record of these things. Next slide, please. And so we saw this most prominently with a Palestinian law student, Nerdine Keswani. She is a law student at CUNY Law, and she's a well-known activist for Palestinian freedom. She's also a frequent target of Zionist groups who have deployed so many smear campaigns against her and false accusations of anti-Semitism to vilify her. And so since she started law school in 2019, anti-Palestinian groups and students like Stop Anti-Semitism and BDS Report have targeted Nerdine using cyberbullying tactics. And in September 2020, she faced a character assassination campaign after she posted an old video of herself criticizing a friend for wearing a t-shirt that like promoted the IDF. And this huge vilification campaign followed based on this incident. And it was bolstered by act.il, the Israeli government affiliated app. And they rewarded hundreds of users for sending these pre-scripted emails to her CUNY administrator that falsely claimed that she threatened a fellow student and called for her to be punished. Except the friend that was in her video was neither a Zionist nor a CUNY student. And so CUNY Law initially released statements condemning her because of this pressure that they were experiencing from these Israel organizations. And these statements condemning her, published by CUNY Law, exposed her further to like racist and violent attacks. And so it wasn't until months after student pressure that CUNY Law finally issued a statement in support of her, saying that the law school supports free speech rights of Nerdine Keswani and other Palestinian students, and others who have been vilified for their activism. So unfortunately, it's like the outspoken Palestinian advocates like Nerdine who often face the fiercest attacks and Zionist harassment campaigns online. Next slide. So another tactic we're going to talk about are free speech violations. Next. And there are examples from all different kinds of contexts. They're primarily campuses, but censorship efforts are directed at libraries, cultural events, and so many others. These free speech violations are often taken in the forms of microaggressions or bureaucratic barriers. So, for example, we've seen university administrators cancel program or classes, they've banned student groups, they've sanctioned students, they have fired and rescinded job offers to professors, and they've scrutinized departments, all because of the expression of support for Palestinian rights. We've also seen the denying or delaying of funding or room reservations for student groups and student events. We've seen balancing Palestine programs with pro-Israel programming or requiring neutral moderators for like Palestine events. We've seen advocates face pressure to change their speakers or their issues, to put out disclaimers, distancing, them from the school so that the advocate has this like distance between themselves and the school and what they're saying, or their event, it's not affiliated with the school or the beliefs of the school. And we've also seen the imposing of police presence on events and charging student groups for extra security. Next slide. And so Butler University, I believe this happened, I think in 2021, yes. So Butler University canceled an event with Dr. Angela Davis in April of 2021, just 3 days before the event was scheduled to take place. And the university claimed that the event was postponed by the student government because established processes weren't followed. But the student government, in actuality, faced a ton of pressure to distance themselves from the event because of Dr. Davis's support for Palestinian rights. And so it wasn't until a bunch of pressure from Palestinian students and their allies did Butler University reinstate the event. But this is just an example how procedural excuses are always used and weaponized against Palestine advocates as an excuse to justify censorship of campus activity or advocacy for Palestinian freedom. Next slide. And so, like false accusations, we are also seeing efforts to codify these restrictions on free speech, especially around boycotts. So you'll recall that we talked a little bit about BDS at the very beginning of the presentation, but we're seeing now states with anti-boycott laws on the books. Over 33 states have them. And the aim and the goal here is to punish boycotts for Palestinian rights and to chill advocacy for Palestinian rights more broadly. And so here we see anti-BDS laws that prohibit state contracts with or investments in entities that boycott Israel. So these laws usually require like a state contractor to provide like a written oath or certification that they will not boycott Israel. Some states actually require officials to compile and make available blacklists of entities that support boycotts. Again, further chilling BDS and prohibiting state contractors or investors with these listed entities that support boycotts. Next slide. And we've seen that these laws have had a material impact on the livelihoods and lives of those that have been directly affected by them. Because these laws have a chilling effect on speech far beyond their stated objectives. Because a lot of people are often confused over the scope of these anti-BDS laws, or like trying to figure out, whether it applies to me as a student or a student group or as an employee at this certain company. And so this confusion over the scope and the deliberate misapplication of these laws still have the intended effect. It chills people and it punishes or it attempts to punish speakers supporting Palestinian rights in a range of different contexts that's often outside of the state funding or contract context. And again, that's the whole goal. These laws are designed to chill you into self-censorship. Slide. But the good news is the courts have found these laws are unconstitutional. 2 years ago, or I believe a year ago, a court in Texas blocked enforcement of their state's amended anti-boycott law against a Palestinian contractor, citing concerns that it would violate his First Amendment right to boycott. And in 2021, the Eighth Circuit reversed a lower court, finding that this Arkansas anti-boycott law violated the First Amendment. So these anti-BDS laws are being struck down as unconstitutional. And with these decisions, not a single anti-boycott law has actually been upheld on the merits. Instead, courts are finding that boycotts for Palestinian rights are not distinguishable from historical civil rights boycotts that the Supreme Court has always historically said is protected under the First Amendment. Next slide. And so another tactic we're going to talk about that's often used against Palestine advocates is discrimination and harassment. We have seen that Palestinian students, faculty, and employees have faced amplified discrimination and harassment on campus, in their workplace, and in other contexts, often being singled out amongst their allies for bullying and false accusations. And again, these harassment campaigns, like the false accusations tactic, are laced with racist tropes, anti-Muslim content and anti-Palestinian myths. So one example of this, next slide, is with Ahmed Raldik. In June 2020, Ahmed became the first Palestinian elected as president of the Florida State University Student Senate. Following his election, he was suddenly the target of a huge campaign of attacks from the university's president to state lawmakers and social media campaigns, all of them aiming to remove him from his position and attacking him for expressing his outrage over Israel's treatment of Palestinians. And Ahmed was just a Palestinian college student, being very vocal about his Palestinian identity, for his advocacy for Palestinian rights and justice and freedom. But as soon as he became in a position of power, in a position of being part of his school student senate, he faced a huge discrimination campaign and harassment campaign. Next slide. But I want to end on a good note. We've outlined a lot of different tactics, repressions. I've tried to lace in different case studies and ways in which we've seen it, most notably being played out. But I want to end on a positive note, because this is really what fuels our work. And personally, as a Palestinian who's experienced this in so many different contexts in my personal life and my work life, and now, dedicating my legal career to working with others who are experiencing it, you really need to sort of focus on the ways in which we stand strong in the face of oppression and the ways in which it's worked. Next slide. So we are finding strength through unity and resistance. There are so many examples of resistance and pushback in each of these tactics. We see that the tide is turning. We're seeing an increased awareness of and opposition to Israel's treatment of Palestinians. And even in the face of these extreme repressive measures, we see SJP chapters growing, we're seeing BDS wins accumulate, and they're all filtering up from the grassroots all the way up to decision makers. And one example of this in 2020, the students at Butler University in Indiana mounted a successful campaign against 2 resolutions that were aimed to crack down on the right to advocate for Palestine on campus. And these resolutions were proposed as retaliation against an event that featured protest art from around the world. But we saw success in this scenario. We saw it again with the student government at University of Illinois Urbana-Champaign, or UIUC, who, when they passed a resolution demanding an apology from the chancellor over a school-wide email that conflated criticism of Israel with anti-Semitism, and called a Palestinian student's presentation on Palestine anti-Semitic. Next slide. And we also see legislative victories. Like I mentioned, a lot of these anti-BDS laws are being struck down and found unconstitutional. And it's really showing that when you show up, when you speak out, when you organize, it really makes a difference. And I'm sure you all know this, but this is just another reason why advocacy is so important. In our movement, in our framework of movement lawyering, it is not the law and the lawyers who will swoop in and be the heroes and save the day. Instead, it's coordination with activists, with advocates that are on the ground, grassroots organizations doing the work that's proven to be successful. Next slide. And then lastly, we're seeing a lot of cross-movement solidarity. Repression, even including legislative repression, is not unique to Palestinian rights. It's not unique to Palestinian rights advocacy, and it's part of a broader context where the government is cracking down on protesters. they're cracking down on human rights defenders, and they're cracking down on anyone dissenting from the status quo. So, we're seeing that even in the face of all these repressive measures, we're seeing so many wins, and US representatives using the term apartheid, for example, in regards to Israel. And lastly, Palestine Legal is always happy to be a resource where we can. Please don't ever hesitate to reach out, encourage your friends, colleagues, whoever may be, family members to reach out as well. That's our email address, our Twitter handle, and also our website. And that's the end of the presentation.
Thank you, Aman. That was really great. I feel like I went through a lot of emotions through that presentation, but I'm happy we ended on something more positive. I have a couple of thoughts, but I'm gonna wait. I want to open it up for discussion. And first, just thank you for being here and for Palestine Legal's work. Something I was thinking of, I had to write a paper last semester, and I was so grateful for Palestine Legal having all of these documented, because I was trying to write about like legal, I had to look at legal cases that affected Palestinian advocacy in higher ed. And it was like, if I didn't have these resources documented, if you guys didn't have these documented, I wouldn't have been able to have, the proper citations and all of that. So on so many levels, like this documentation is really important. I guess I'll start us off with this thought I have, and then I really want to open it up for just a discussion, raising hands, just unmuting, unless there was something else, Emma, that you wanted to like have this formatted. Okay.
No, yeah.
Something I was thinking of when you were sharing about the student Ahmed, like I think what was really, I haven't thought of it in this way before, but it's like he's okay as just a student, but the minute he's in a position of power, that's when it's like, no. So like you can exist here, but then if you have some type of platform to say something, that's where we're gonna cut that off. And that's just, I don't know if it's a comment or a question or just frustration of like, just putting that together, that like, yeah, we're allowed to be, but just don't do anything about it, basically. And you can think it in private, but don't bring it out to other people. And yeah, it's very frustrating. And then one of the apps that you mentioned, or the phone, I had no idea. I knew about Canary Mission, but I did not know about. I think it was the one also that you put ACT-IL.
Yeah, it seems like someone put it in the chat. But yeah, unfortunately, there's like a growing list, right? There's like Canary Mission, Stop Anti-Semitism, BDS report. There's so many, it's getting difficult to keep track of them. But ACT.IL, that's the app that's actually like rewarding people for like sending out emails and like sending out like pre-scripted complaints, and like rewarding them with like gift cards. Like Amazon, you get to become like a part of a raffle for like an Amazon gift card. And I think Stop Anti-Semitism does the same thing. But yeah, it's a long list. The list is never ending. It's going to continue to grow. But I think like amidst all of this, like they're all aiming to do the same thing. So despite how many organizations or apps there are, they're all aiming to do the same thing. And just going back to your point that you just made, I'm really glad you made that point. And like, that's why I really emphasize the fact that like Ahmed suddenly became in a position of like leadership. He became like a position of power in so much that like he's student senate, right? Like it's not the president of the country. Like he's student senate of his college, university. Like he's in a position of leadership. And that's when it became an issue. And I see that with so many clients, that like these Palestinians or Palestine advocates can exist as students in so much as that they're not being loud and putting on these big events, or not applying to like become a part of a student group, or a notable student group, or like in a position of leadership. Because as soon as they see someone in a position of leadership, again, they just want to tear them down. And of course, that's like part of the anti-Palestinian, I think, like repression. But I think there's more that's kind of looped in there. That it's like anti-Arab, anti-Muslim, anti-people of color. When it's a woman, it's like, there's so many different things that are happening at play. But certainly, it's like the Palestinian identity at the core of it all.
Yeah, that makes sense. Can I ask real quick, Danya? I know we have go next, but the apps, like so when these come out in legal cases, how do these apps, like this is clearly, like if there's clear proof that you're getting rewarded for doing something, and so obviously you're being pushed to like, or they're pre-scripted and stuff, do they stand like legally?
So technically, these online blacklists and apps aren't doing legally, not technically. Legally, they're not doing anything wrong. They're calling you anti-Semitic. They're complaining to your school for things that you might have published online. They're complaining to your employers, but they're entitled to their opinions. And if they need to advance their opinions by rewarding users through like gift cards or whatever that they might do, then that stands. I know, it's really frustrating.
Yeah, it's so frustrating. Okay, Rania, go ahead.
So I have a couple of thoughts, but the first one is that, so I don't know if everyone on the call knows this or not, but in 2017, PAC actually, because we were founded in 2014, and 2017, I guess, was when more people began to know more about us. There was a Zionist robot campaign that went to completely destroy our Facebook page, where literally overnight we received, I don't even know how many. It was so many that our rating was 5 on Facebook. Within like 2 hour span, it went to 1. And when we looked into it, because we're trying to reverse it, Facebook, one, said they couldn't do anything about it. And second, it was what you're saying, that there was like people getting paid to basically write stuff on, and destroy different Palestinian organizations and different Palestinian pages, to kind of, keep them from that. Because obviously, if you rate, at least I think that's how it was. I don't know if it's still like that now, but if it's a lower rate, your algorithm gets messed up. You can close down the page. And at that time, we were really growing, because Facebook's our largest platform. So I think it's like it hits close to home too. Like this isn't just a far away thing that exists. But we ended up doing like an anti that campaign, and we asked all our community members to come together, and we were able to bring it back up to like a 3.5, and we're still at a 3.5. But we had, we tried to counteract that with actual people reviewing the center, and it worked out really well. So that's my first thought. The second thing I wanted to say also, and Emmett, if you can kind of speak on this, because, I've been having this conversation a lot with people. I think, like you said, there's the bigger problem with a lot of these campaigns is not only actively silencing advocates or community organizers, but it's making people who would think about joining afraid. And I want to say that those are the people that are more afraid, if it makes sense. I was recently sharing with Abid and some of the people who work with us at PAC about a story with a girl. She's a senior in high school. Just because she's been very vocal about Palestine, she ended up coming in with a shirt basically saying like something along the lines of like Free Palestine, and she got an in-school suspension. And I was pushing the family, like, you need to do something about this. And then they started saying, oh, the girl has, like a little bit of an attitude problem. She has all this different stuff. So they didn't want to like blow it out of proportion, just for the sake of the girl. But the family that I was talking to said something. She's like, it's not fair though. She goes, every time this happens, to an Israeli student or a Jewish student, automatically, like, it's like the end of the world. And I told her, and I urge this to all of you and to everyone else. And I said, it's because they record and they say everything, they report everything, right? The end of the world happens and we're like, should we report it? Should we not? Like, it has to be to the nth degree where it's like, no one tolerates this, that we report it. And the reality is that that's not how other people are functioning, right? The other people, like, specifically this oppressed group, right? Is every little sign of oppression is getting reported, and not only getting reported, but getting like magnified and put on several different platforms. And I think we need to challenge ourselves as a community to start reporting all of these little things, even the stories that we shared in the beginning. And then my last point that builds onto this is with this family specifically. Like, I was talking to her and she was like, yeah, but you don't want her to get on like Canary Mission. You don't want her to get on all these things. And I said, but like, I know, and I maybe come from a place of privilege, but I said, I was like, if she gets on these lists and people don't hire her because of these lists, then you don't want her to be working on in those places anyway, right? So I think we have this like two things that are happening. Like, on one end, as a community, like, we're not reporting enough, and at the other end, it's just like this fear mongering is working. Like, we're not we're disengaging a little bit. It's like, okay, we can do the fun things, but we can't do like the things that actually, matter, make a difference. So I don't know if it's a general comment, but if you want to also speak on it, Emma, like from your experience, like what are you seeing and how do you think is the best way to combat that? Like, how do we work with our community to, encourage people to speak up more? Like, I think you were saying like there was, I forget the number you said, but I think if actually everyone reported, we'd maybe be triple, if not quadruple that number.
Mhm. Absolutely. I always say whenever I'm speaking to folks that like, we've documented 2,000 incidents, but those are just the ones we've documented. Like in reality, the number of incidents that are actually occurring are probably far beyond the amount that we are just aware of. And you raised two really excellent points, Rania. The first being about like confidence and empowerment, I think in like a lot of different ways. One of the things I personally struggle with a lot with my clients is like, they'll come to me with these really terrible stories of harassment or discrimination. And, as an attorney, it's like really like, I want to be both their advocate and I want to like present all the legal solutions and like options that are available to them without pushing them too much outside their comfort zone and overstepping, because most of the times people are really terrified. They're terrified to go public. They're terrified to file the same complaints that are being used by Zionists. Zionists are weaponizing Title VI complaints, which are like discrimination complaints happening at the Department of Education through their Office for Civil Rights, and filing them left and right, saying that, this SJP group or this student event or this like Palestine conference, all of it threatens my identity as a Jewish student. And these complaints are being filed so frivolously against Palestine advocates and student groups, and they're being forced to like go through these investigations. Except when Palestinians are facing actual discrimination, they kind of shy away from wanting to file a Title VI because they're like, well, I don't know, I'm kind of worried, like, I don't want my name out there, or like, I don't want to go public, like, I don't want a blog to be posted, or I don't want this newspaper to cover my story. And it's like, but the Zionists aren't shying away from that at all. They're using it as their weapons and they're using it to progress their thinking and their tactics. So like, why aren't we? But the fear is so real too. And I think, I've been struggling with this like throughout my entire time at Pal-Legal. I think some of the ways I've kind of learned, there's not like one solution, but one thing that helps is like connecting students with other students. So like if I meet a Palestinian who's like really reserved about telling their story and like doesn't want to, go public, I'll connect them with someone like Ahmed, who's like a fierce, resilient, loud and proud, told his story, did not shy away at all, Palestinian student who went through the same campaign, smear campaign. So I think like finding like power in numbers and like finding confidence and like empowering each other is like a really big thing that I've been seeing work. And, encouraging people to still document and like keep record of things, even if they're not totally comfortable with publicity. So there's still ways like as a student group or as an employee to like make sure you're tracking everything. And there are ways to also do it like not publicly, right? Like you can file complaints through your HR that are like super confidential and, your name won't ever come out. And that's still a way to track repression and to like track anti-Palestinian discrimination. Same with students, like we're finding ways for the students who are not super comfortable with the publicity, while still encouraging them to make sure to track and like keep record of and to document. But the fear mongering is real, and I can never invalidate that, even in my position of like privilege, in my position of comfort, because it really is real. And like there are people who are like, nothing has happened to me yet, but I want to avoid it. So this person who is totally unaffected by something like Canary Mission is still affected by Canary Mission because they won't speak out for the fear of being profiled on Canary Mission because they've seen what it's done to their allies, their friends, their family members. So I think like, again, this is a huge thing that Palestine Legal just tries to do is, offer support, offer resources as much as we possibly can so that people feel that even if they are put in these positions, they'll have somewhere to turn to. They'll have someone to talk to, an attorney or like a community member, so that it won't be like the end all be all. Like you have a Canary Mission profile, that's okay. We'll help you navigate it. Your employer called you into a meeting because of something you posted on your Twitter. That's okay. We'll teach you all about what free speech rights you have. and what you should say going into this meeting. So that's been a way, but truly it's a never ending, I think, kind of problem that we have to tackle.
Brian?
Hi, yeah, first, thanks for coming and thanks for all the work that Paralegal does. So actually next week's speaker was the main author of a petition that our state coalition sent out to the legislators and the committee that's considering the IRA resolution in New Jersey. And I noticed, actually, we borrowed a graphic from y'all, and with attribution and permission, and for the change.org thing. But I saw that you had a thing with like hashtags and things like that. That you're already on top of New Jersey. What more can we do with what's going on right here in our backyard? I mean, that resolution explicitly says at the end that like they're going to use the examples in the IRA definition, which is like the super problematic part of that. Yeah.
Well, it seems like you are already kind of doing all that you can be doing, or it seems like you're already pretty much exposed to the work. But I think with legislative measures, really like there are a lot of different pieces. I think like you mentioned like our like toolkits, and we do provide these like kind of like direct action toolkits. Click on these links, we'll provide you, all the content text that you need to like write to your legislator, write to your congressman or woman. And so engaging with, and not just not just like the work that we're putting out there, but that a lot of incredible organizations out there are putting out into the world. There are a lot of organizations that are working directly on like legislation and combating problematic legislation like IRA resolutions. I think starting conversations in spaces where there might not be happening is a huge one. Like all too often I'm in spaces where people who've never heard of the IRA definition or IRA resolutions. So just educating people is a huge thing. I really like see the role of attorneys as like distributors of information more than anything, and like just like pouring information into the masses so that people can self-educate themselves and self-educate their families and their circle groups and their communities. And I think that's like where like real change happens. Absolutely, please share it. And I wish I had some links like kind of prepped to share too in our chat, but maybe I can pull them up. So I would love to share resources and just other ways, informative ways to like get involved and do things like even in your own communities. But I think direct action and like toolkits from organizations like Paralegal, like there are so many, JVP, CARE, so many coalitions and different communities are doing this work. So I think really just like boosting the efforts of organizations that are already doing the existing work is one of the biggest things.
Yeah, I think that's an important part of it. Sometimes I feel like we are trying to reproduce stuff that's already done because we're not as like united or like, and it's not a bad thing, but like, there's moments like heightened moments of Palestine advocacy. So then like people want to start new stuff, and sometimes like it's already there. We just need to like sustain it and share it together. And thank you, Brian, for sharing that. I can also put that in the Google Classroom. Any other comments or questions? Alston, I saw you had your hand up at one point. Did you want to share?
Oh, I was just kind of curious along the lines of, I mean, it's kind of off topic, but on topic. I'm an engineer at Amazon and part of a group where we're kind of trying to figure out how we can organize more tech workers to organize against Project Nimbus. But along that lines, we have a lot of skilled engineers. And if there's anything we can automate for Paralegal to kind of help these like requests and things like that, that might be something cool that a lot of us would probably be interested in doing. So maybe I'll reach out to you via email after this or something. Be cool.
Yeah, let's connect. That's awesome. That's really great. Thanks so much for that. I can drop my email in the chat box for anyone who wants to reach out.
Awesome. Thank you.
That would be really cool. And I feel like that's kind of what we've like, I don't know, it's what we look for, like a lot of times, especially like, younger like interns or within PAC, there's a lot of, it's like, well, I don't work in this field, so I can't do anything for Palestine. And then I'm always like, no, it's like you can, not just Palestine, like just in general, in whatever field you're in, I feel like there are ways sometimes we just forget or like aren't empowered in those ways. So that's really cool. Thanks, also. That would be really cool to see. Anyone else have questions, comments?
So I put it in the chat, but Austin, can you explain a little bit more about what you're doing? I'm not too familiar with.
Yeah, so it's not a formal organization yet. Well, first of all, should I explain Project Nimbus? I don't know if anyone. Essentially, I think last year, Amazon and Google signed a massive cloud deal with Israel to basically revamp their cloud infrastructure, and essentially a lot of deals with the IDF, Shin Bet, their other Mossad and everything, and basically it's going to be used. They haven't really released everything it's going to be used for, but between what they're obfuscating, we're assuming it's going to be used to really ramp up their surveillance capabilities. So we already heard a few weeks back from like Blue Wolf, where they already do facial recognition on everyone. That will be basically on steroids because they don't have the cloud infrastructure to do that, to really scale it on their own. So Amazon and Google are providing the infrastructure for them to do that. Is our assumption, which I think is a good assumption because they're very vague about what it is. So there's a lot of Amazon and Google employees who have been talking about how can we advocate against this and how can we get them to, no tech for apartheid. Yeah. And so basically it's just a group of us figuring out what we can do internally and externally to kind of bring more visibility to this and stop it at some point.
Thank you. I had no idea. So thanks for sharing that. And yeah, more power to you. And I'm sure Palestine Legal could help with advice and like general direction. And if there's anything PAC could do, we're also happy to help.
Thank you.
So on that note of what PAC can do, Emma, can you tell us a little bit more about what PAC can do to help? I think to help with these main points. I was talking to Abida and I was telling her, I think, a huge part of what you were saying is building this confidence. And I think slowly, like through these classes and through a lot of the stuff we do at PAC, like we are building this confidence, like be Palestinian, be proud, and who cares, like if people don't like it. So I think that's like the long-term goal that we're working on. But like in the short term, I'm wondering if like there's some advice you have in terms of things we can do to get people, to encourage people to speak up. Maybe there's an event we can do together, or maybe a new workshop series we create.
Mm-hmm. You're asking what can PAC do, but honestly, what doesn't PAC do? You guys are amazing, truly the most incredible community I've ever come across. And sometimes I'm a little envious of the New Jersey people because I'm like, I wish there was a more local one here in New York. But you guys are really, truly incredible. I think like there are so many different things that come to mind. Like more workshops, presentations, things like this would be, I think, a great start. Co-hosting events too with, whatever different communities that you're like tapped in. I know the center is just like really well networked. And I think like, I'm trying to think like, you guys do a lot of really great like public education and like political education, but I guess I'm wondering if there are ways to get maybe like, I don't know if there are any like college students that are involved in the PAC community that like are thinking about law school and like want more experience with like giving Know Your Rights workshops, if like that's something we could do together. Or if there are ways we can just like find a way to like send all of our like resources to you all and you all figure out like the best way to utilize it for your different communities. Like we have a lot of great resources on really everything, like on BDS, like on anti-BDS laws, on the types of like smear campaigns and like different organizations that conduct them and like what to know and like how to navigate it. So if there's other ways to just like push resources and do more political education, I think that's a big thing. And then, yeah, like legislative lobbying, like maybe that's something you all can, I'm sure you all are already doing this though. Like, I feel like you all are really like already tapped in like all these amazing different spaces.
Yeah, I was gonna, Jason, I don't want to put you on the spot, but yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, happy to jump in real quick. So we are definitely meeting with our local legislators and also co-sponsors and sponsors of the IRA bills. So we're definitely making a push on the advocacy side to educate and build relationships with our legislators so that they know PAC is a strong community organization. The Palestinian American community in New Jersey is a very prominent community, and they should be listening to our voices as their constituencies. So that's pretty much what we've been working on. We also have an op-ed that we are working to get published, hopefully within the next week or so. And I'll also add a link from Palestine Legal, actually, that was shared from another representative from Palestine Legal with me today. Just a brief explainer of IRA for people in the chat that want to visualize it.
Amazing. See, you all are already on the right track, doing incredible work, truly.
Thanks, Jason, for sharing. Does anyone else have questions or comments? We can also, yeah, we feel like there is much more to do. I think that's, yeah, and I don't know if this is, you know, place to talk about it, but I think part of just that like emotional burnout is real. And so I like, and then when things happen, it's like, am I doing enough? Am I not doing enough? And like, I feel like that's part of it. It's not fear mongering necessarily, but it's just that like fatigue and like the turnaround and like, how do you sustain yourself doing that work is something like we're constantly thinking about. So yeah. I don't know if you have advice of how you sustain yourself doing all this work.
I would love some advice.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think there are different degrees to it. Like there are the Palestine advocates who are facing this and they're not Palestinians, right? And then there's like Palestinian Palestine advocates who are dealing with this. And I think, you know, there's like just a higher degree of burnout there because there's just so much more at stake and there's just so many like different things at play. You know, it's not just your free speech on the line, but it's just like your personal life kind of being interwoven with all of that. And that's what I experience really on like a daily basis. Like I absolutely love my work. There's nothing in the world I want to be doing more than this work. It's so fulfilling. But at the same time, it's like very equally draining. And so we're always talking and thinking about ways to like sustain our work, to avoid burnout. And yeah, I mean, I think we're all trying our best, right? Like we're all like finding hobbies and like making sure to move our bodies and exercise. But the biggest thing for me truly is like interactions like this, like spaces like these. That's what keeps like, that's really what sustains me. Like connecting with other Palestine advocates, connecting with other Palestinians, like just like hearing other people's stories that resonate so closely with mine. That's what makes me feel so much lighter because it's a never ending battle. And like, we always are going to feel like we have so much to do and there's so much left that we need to be doing and we're not doing enough. But once we realize kind of like the unity in our struggles and just how many people there are like backing us, it feels really good.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that. It's true. I think that's sometimes what all we have is like that community connection, and that's what we have to rely on to keep going. And you are always welcome to come and hang out with the New Jersey Palestinian area. Please come visit us.
Yeah, you're not that far, Emma. You need to come more. And we have, you know, we have Sabatas here, right?
Yes, they're my cousins.
You're from Wow.
I went, so I was at the gala recently to accept the award on behalf of Pal Legal. And I was sitting at a table of like these really wonderful people, but didn't know their names or who they were. And after I went up and accepted the award and came back down, they were like, "Are you a Sabata?" And I was like, "Yes." Like, am I supposed to know you? And they were like, "We're first cousins of your first cousins." So like they're related to like a different parent, but small world, subhanAllah. There are a lot of my family members that love the PAC community and like really active members.
It's really cute.
Yeah,
So definitely come visit then.
I know I need to make my way to Jersey more. Inshallah, I will.
And we also honored, on that note, we did honor Paralegal for all their amazing work during our gala. I think we gave them like the 2022 Inspirational Strive for Freedom Award, something along those lines award. So we appreciate Paralegal and all the amazing work they do. And they've helped like PAC and a lot of our constituents on a very regular basis. I think I was on the phone with Dima like a lot, especially in the beginning, and now, pretty regularly, unfortunately.
That's so kind of you.
Anyone else have comments or questions? Or just thoughts, or just in an open ranting session if needed. We can stop the recording too, if people feel more comfortable asking questions that way. We usually go until 9:30, but we can end early and give everyone a little break for this week. I don't think next week's will. So I know David, I had a very great conversation with David. There's going to be a lot of great stuff to discuss.
Yeah, that's not going to be short. I don't know. I don't know how big or small a world Paralegal is. I know when people are like, "Hey, do you know so whoever?" And I'm like Rutgers was a big college. What are you talking about? But I don't know if you know Zoha, but tell her I said hi if you are bumping into her soon.
Yeah. She's one of our team members. She's an incredible, brilliant attorney. How do you know Zoha? What a small world.
So she was my initial point of contact when I was going through my whole nonsense here on a couple fronts, and we kind of stayed in touch. And then she was a speaker on a panel I did. I'm with the national DSA, BDS and Palestine Solidarity Group. And I did a thing for teachers for Palestine for this summer. Actually, Abir was there too as a speaker. And so, yeah, the last session was a panel, and Zoha was kind enough to donate her time on it. And I believe she was also our point of contact as a legal consult on our No Appetite for Apartheid food boycott campaign. So yeah, she's great. We love her. Yeah.
Awesome. I'll send your hello.
Any final comments, questions, feelings? Okay, so if you all can just help me thank Ahmed again for sharing everything he did with us. I think this conversation came at a right time in our course, because we did like a lot of history and a lot of present day and what's been going on, and things feel rough. So I think this rejuvenated and gives a little more inspiration to keep doing this, and that we have people who will strongly advocate, and that there are resources and there's community if we ever need it. So thank you so much. Please send our hello to everyone at Palestine Legal also, and hopefully you come and visit soon and we'll get to hang out with you. And thank you everyone for being on as usual and for the great conversations. And I'm excited for next week's conversation, and we'll see you then.
Thank you all so much for having me.